When you hear the word directing, what immediately jumps to mind? I'd be willing to bet that it's an image of someone like Steven Spielberg, Martin Scorsese, Christopher Nolan, or some other famous director. And I think that's a pretty good first thought. Spielberg is a legend in pop cinema, Scorsese is arguably the greatest living filmmaker, and Nolan is the new kid on the block making great movie after great movie. They are all great filmmakers and great directors, but to get more to the point, what do they do that makes those names stand out? What exactly makes a good director? While there are an immense number of ways that you can answer that question, I think the broadest and most easily accessible answer is this. A good director is able to convey emotion and meaning through the craft of filmmaking. There are a myriad of ways that a director can do this, whether it be coaxing great performances from their cast, imbuing meaning into camera shots, or introducing visual motifs to bring home the themes of the story. I think it would be needlessly complex and frankly irresponsible to dive into the theory of directing in one short video. But I think it's possible to show an example of what makes for good directing, and I want to do that with a somewhat unorthodox pick. Stranger Things is a show that many have glommed onto as part of a symbol of what is wrong with streaming in recent weeks. The argument over whether it was appropriate to spend as much money per episode as they did is not something I wish to discuss here. Whether we like it or not, Stranger Things caught on with the general public in a way that only a handful of shows in recent memory have. I think that part of that is due to the filmmaking on display. I still maintain that season 1 of the show is as close to perfect, if not outright perfect, as any show can get. The amount of confidence shown in the writing and directing of that first season is astounding. While I have my very legitimate gripes with season 2, the strong visual storytelling remained. Then season 3 happened, and that brings us to the entire point of the video. There are any number of ways that I could showcase how a scene has great direction, but just about anyone and everyone on this platform can show you a scene from Spielberg or Scorsese or Tarantino and explain why it's good. If I'm being honest, I think that's kind of lazy. So instead, I've decided to go a different route and show you why a much less lauded directorial effort can still showcase what it means to be a good visual storyteller. Also, Stranger Things 4 is right around the corner, so hey, what better time than now? So let's rewind a bit to 2019 and to the penultimate episode of Stranger Things 3, Chapter 7, The Bite. For the sake of context, and as a warning for those of you who haven't seen Stranger Things 3, I will be spoiling some key plot points going forward. If you have not seen the series but still want to see it, I would recommend getting through at least that episode before continuing this video. If you're still here, then let's get this show on the road. The scene in question that I want to talk about begins at just before the 27-minute mark. For context on what has happened up to this point, the character of Steve Harrington began working at an ice cream shop between seasons 2 and 3. While at this shop, he became co-workers with his former classmate Robin. Over the course of the season, Robin and Steve start to uncover a sort of conspiracy that is taking place within the mall, and the two start to develop a friendship. Eventually, the conspiracy leads them to discover that Russians have developed a lab underneath the mall that is experimenting with technology that is similar, if not outright identical, to the same technology that Brenner was using in Season 1. This gateway is leading directly to the Upside Down, connecting it to the real world. Robin and Steve are captured by the Russians and interrogated, with Steve suffering some really brutal injuries. The two manage to escape the clutches of the army after some help from Dustin and Lucas's sister, Erica. They then find themselves alone in one of the mall's bathrooms. This is where we begin our scene. The scene starts with a close-up of a toilet flushing. This is a little bit of comic relief that is also weirdly effective foreshadowing for the events that are about to unfold. We then cut to a higher angle over Steve and slowly pan down to reveal Robin. This isn't even just a cool shot, however. It's also a showcase of something that will come up again later in the video. This is a directional technique known as blocking. Blocking is essentially how elements in a scene, whether that be props, actors, or any combination of in-scene elements, operate within the camera's placements and movements. Basically, this is the technical choreography of how a scene unfolds. So why does this matter, you might ask? Well, Film is a visual medium, and it relies heavily on those visual elements to tell a story. A lot of what makes film such a rewarding way of experiencing story is because it isn't just listening to dialogue or reading. Film allows us to see things without being told them. Anyway, back to Stranger Things. As the camera pans down, we notice two things. The first is that there is a physical barrier between Steve and Robin. The second is the position that Robin is in is almost the complete opposite position of Steve. He sits hunched over upright next to the toilet bowl, and Robin lays on the ground facing the ceiling. This singular camera move does a number of different things in setting up the scene that is about to play out, but the two most important is that it establishes the geography of the room we're in, and the second is it establishes the connection between the characters as the scene progresses. Once the camera stops, we cut to a close-up of Robin, who asks Steve if the ceiling has stopped spinning for him. Then we get a close-up of Steve answering her question before cutting to a medium shot outside of both stalls that shows both characters in relation to one another. Once again, this shot establishes the geography of the scene as well as putting these two characters in diametrically opposed positions. Robin is on her back and perpendicular to the camera, and Steve is sitting upright and facing the camera directly. As the conversation between these two progresses, we then switch between the close-up shot of Robin from before and a new medium close-up angle on Steve. Robin then switches positions and the camera angle on her switches as well. Now, up to this point, the camera has been cutting back and forth as a way to keep the conversation feeling relatively fresh. This is a scene with just two people talking, and there has to be some way to keep this nearly 2-minute long stretch feeling relatively fresh. What's interesting though is the changing of the angles. When the angle switches on Steve, he has the power, literally. Robin asks him to interrogate her, and he does so, albeit kinda silly. Then there's a switch to Robin's positioning and the camera angle on her. She now has the power in this situation. When Robin then asks her question, the camera cuts back to the outside shot featuring both characters. And as Steve gives his answer, the camera ever so slowly pushes in and pans towards her. It's subtle enough to not bring attention to itself, but still noticeable to the naked eye. The reason that this is really great is because Robin's question shifted the dynamic in their conversation. Where it was light and silly before, it has now moved into a bit more of a serious tone. Robin then presses Steve on his response, and the editing has the scene cut between two competing medium close shots of the two characters as information is relayed. Then, as the big picture of what Steve is saying comes into focus, we cut between the two characters with new matching close-up shots. Steve has expressed his feelings, and Robin is realizing what that means. What makes this pairing awesome is the way in which it tells competing stories. On the one hand, the close-up of Steve is intimate. It's Steve opening up. The close-up of Robin is just like her blocking throughout the scene, the opposite of Steve. The close-up on Robin feels almost claustrophobic as she realizes what Steve is saying. The frame is literally closing in on her. As the revelation that Steve likes Robin hits its crescendo, we switch back to the shot from outside the bathroom stalls. Steve's positioning has him relatively open. He's just opened up to the girl that he likes. On the other side of the screen, Robin is still closed off to the camera, and she is now huddled down in an almost fetal position, trying to block out what has just happened. The scene then plays out with a couple of close-ups between the two characters as Steve asks about Robin's well-being before we cut to our next shot. This shot is maybe my favorite in the entire scene. It's a complete mirror of that second shot of the scene with the camera panning from overhead between the two stalls. And why I love this shot so much is because not only is it mirroring the sort of opening camera movement, it also has the addition of Steve climbing under the stall to meet with Robin. The camera is crossing the threshold just like Steve is. Not only that, but it ends with another brilliant bit of blocking. As the camera comes to stop just before we cut, we get a glimpse of the two characters in the shared space of the bathroom stall. But once again, they are opposing one another. This entire scene plays out almost like a duel, and the camera makes us aware of that the entire time. The scene then moves to a medium shot of both characters as they occupy the same space, again facing opposite directions. Then we begin cutting back and forth between over-the-shoulder medium close-ups as Robin begins to rebuff Steve's feelings. Again, almost as if these two are dueling forces. The scene continues like this as Robin tries to make Steve understand that they can't be anything more than friends until she has to do exactly what he did moments earlier. The camera then shifts to a close-up as Robin begins to express her feelings. This is just like the overhead panning shot, mirroring a previous sequence. Now, as Robin begins to say how she feels to Steve, the close-up of her is more open, but the opposite is happening with him. The framing of Steve feels closed off and almost claustrophobic. As a character, Steve has had to deal with heartbreak just 6 months prior when he and Nancy's relationship crashed to a halt. Now that same crashing sensation is hitting him as he's trying to tell the girl that he likes her as more than just friends. This camera position puts him in a frame where he is boxed in and surrounded by one solid color. Then, as the revelation is coming to a head that Robin is a lesbian and that she isn't into Steve, the composition moves back to the medium shot of both characters in the stall together as they avoid each other's gazes. We cut back to the close-ups as Robin's vulnerability is showcased and Steve processes what just happened. The frames are intimate and closed off. As the two begin to come together through their dialogue, we move back to the over-the-shoulder medium close-ups, getting more of each character in the frame of the other, even emphasizing this with a nicely placed return to the medium shot with both of them in frame. The characters were raw and vulnerable with one another, and although it didn't exactly turn out the way that either of them had expected, they are no longer fighting one another. They're on a different page than before, but they're there together. The scene plays out with more of the medium close-ups cutting back and forth before finally landing on the same medium shot as it comes to a close. What I think makes this scene so good is that it is able to tell you a story without dialogue. If you were to turn the volume on this scene down and just watch it from beginning to end, you would be able to tell exactly what happens without needing any sort of help in knowing what happened. You might not know that Robin is gay or that she hated Steve because of his stupid hair, but you would get every single bit of emotion that the scene showcases strictly from the blocking and camera work. That to me is the sign of great direction. Is it Spielberg or Scorsese or Tarantino? No, but it's light years ahead of what you see on a ton of modern television, or hell, even modern film. The final season of Stranger Things is upon us, and I thought it would be the best time to look back a little bit at one of the show's impressive bits of filmmaking. It's scenes like this that helped me fall in love with the show back in 2016. And it's scenes like this that showcases what great direction in film is. Thank you, friends, for coming back for another video. I had originally planned for this video back in 2019, and it was supposed to be a much bigger and longer full review of the season, but I think I'll repurpose that format for a deep dive into the series further down the road. Anyway, I'm very happy with how this turned out, and I hope that you enjoyed it, and I hope that you learned something. If you did, please hit that like button and the subscribe button. I would appreciate that very much. If you would like to hear more of my thoughts on TVs and the movies that I watch, or the games that I play, then you can find me hosting Hunting Pixels, a video game podcast that I do with two friends. We also have a Patreon for all the things that we're doing as Culture Bob, so if you like these videos or the podcast, consider joining to help keep the content coming. I think that's all for now, so until next time, take care of yourselves, and goodbye.